much. I am so appreciative to have, I don't know, what are they, your professor? I don't know what to call you.
Just call me O.
Huh?
Call me O.
Oh.
Whatever.
So appreciative to have let me be here with you guys. What I'm going to talk about today isn't necessarily abnormal psych, so you're going to get a reprieve on abnormal psych. However, what I'm going to talk about does have a lot to do with it. Okay, I don't know how many of you are thinking of actually going into psychology and counselors, psychotherapists, and all that good stuff. How many? Like 2, 7? More? Good. Okay, so then this should be right up your alley. And not only that, because psychology is like the only classes you're going to be taking that you can actually apply to yourself. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
That everything that we get to talk about, in some way or another, you can come up with an example, either in your own life, or your family's life, or a movie that you saw, which makes it really, I mean, for me, that's one of the coolest parts of being a psychotherapist. So, quick introduction on me. I graduated from Loyola Marymount with my bachelor's in psychology. Got a master's in psychology from Loyola Marymount also. I've been practicing for 25 years. I know. You look at me and you're like, how can she's doing so young? But yeah, no, it's true. I've done all sorts of work. Worked with marriage, family, and a lot of addiction work. Worked with sex offenders, child abuse. My husband likes to say things like, I've worked with the dregs of society. I've worked in prisons. I've been the clinical director of substance abuse facilities. And actually, I worked for the Bureau of Prisons and created substance abuse programs for prisons. And let's just say I got to see a lot of cool stuff. And about 6, 7 years ago, I decided I didn't really want to, what's the word I want to use, risk myself anymore. And I started writing. And my writing is about psychology. I write about relationships and the things that I've learned, you know, through my life and through my career. I also still do psychotherapy, and I do it via Skype because I live in Big Bear. There isn't a lot of people up there. So I see people via Skype all over the world. I have clients in the Philippines, I have clients in India, and it's probably one of the neatest things I've ever done because it makes you work a little bit differently because you're not face-to-face with somebody. You get to see their faces, but you're not there to be able to catch all the nuances that you would as a psychotherapist. But yeah, no, I have, my husband and I published a book, and currently I'm a doctoral student at Keiser University. And I am taking my last classes. In fact, I have another week after this week, and I'm done with all my classes. Never to take a class again. Yeah. Which is actually kind of bittersweet. We were talking about it before, and it's like, I don't know how to feel about this. Because I like learning. I like this stuff. This is my passion. This is what I enjoy doing. This is what we talk about, you know, over dinner. This is fun for me. Okay? And so, what did I want to do? Abnormal psych. Abnormal psych is probably, and I told, one of the things that I told when she said that she was going to teach abnormal psych, I said, oh my God, that's like my favorite class. I loved abnormal psych as an undergrad. As a grad student, loved it even more. Because then you would actually take the class and then go off and see a client and go, oh my God, I just learned about this. And it's cool, right? I mean, to look at all the abnormal stuff, and sometimes it's a little scary because then you start reading the symptoms and you're like, oops, I got that one. And then you read another one and you're like, oh, I got that one too. And then you get to like the third and the fourth and you're like, well, maybe a little bit, but not really. You know, it's like, what philia do I have this week? And what paranoia do I have this week? But if you look at psychology, that's what we've spent most of our time talking about in psychology for the last 130 years of our history. That's right, we're only 130 years old. Did you know that? Psychology is not a very, I mean, relatively speaking, we're a very new science. So for the last 130 years, well, more like 120 years, we have focused on the abnormal. And boy, do we know a lot about abnormal, don't we? We know about aberrant behavior, we know about dysfunction. When you go into therapy, you're going to be taught how to work with a family or with a couple, and how to, you know, actually map out their relationship, you know, and this dysfunction, and you draw little lines like that. and we spend so much time focused on the abnormal and the dysfunction that you think that that's all it's all about. But psychology is about behavior, right? It's about how you're thinking. So what happened to the normal? When do we get to focus on normal people? Anybody? So that's what positive psychology is about. Positive psychology isn't necessarily the normal, but it's about what makes life worth living. And my work is focused on positive psychology because, yeah, I've done all that other stuff. And it was cool. And it was fun. And I've got stories that'll, scare you straight. And, really funny stories, really scary stories, very sad stories. But I was wondering when I got to be in my 40s, hey, is dysfunction all we have here in psychology? And right around when I got into my 40s, psychology was doing the same thing. Because in the year 2000, they decided, you know what? Enough. Let's start focusing on the good stuff. So positive psychology focuses on things like happiness. Is it like, what are we talking about when we're talking about happiness? Are we talking about rose-colored glasses? Are we talking about being delusional and, thinking everything's wonderful? A little bit yes, a little bit no. Subjective well-being. Very fancy way of saying, do you feel okay? Okay? And making meaning. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Because that's the stuff that really excites me. I enjoy that. Because the more and more I learn about it, the more I realize everything's about meaning. So my dissertation topic, and I know that you guys are still undergrads, but this is exciting for me, so I get to share it with you. My topic is on making meaning and marital satisfaction. Because I write about relationships all day long, I wonder if your ability to make meaning actually affects how happy you are in your marriage, how satisfied you are in your marriage. And as we talk, this is going to make more sense to you. So let's look at happiness really quick. Let's see. Oh, positive psychology. This is really cool to me because this actually started in your lifetime. We actually know the date that positive psychology started. January 2000. I mean, that's pretty impressive. If you think about it, if you ever take history and systems of psychology, they give you rough dates. They might tell you, this is the day that he published that paper, but he actually started this like years before, so we really don't know. But we know exactly when this started. January 2000. The American Psychologist, the journal for the APA, came out and said, guess what? We're starting a new psychology. And we're calling it positive psychology. And they spent a whole journal talking about different parts of positive psychology and the things that we were going to be encompassing when we talked about positive psychology. And we're going to talk about things like, no more dysfunction. We're not going to talk about pathology anymore. We're actually going to talk about things that matter. We're going to talk about what makes your life happy. What makes you feel good at the end of the day. We're not going to talk about the voices in your head. We're going to talk about what do you value? What's more important to you? That's different. After you've taken almost a semester of that normal psych, that's really different. And if you think about it, I don't know, do you actually go into how many people have this, like 1% of the population, whatever. Mm-hmm. If you think about it and you add up all those percentage points, like 0.1 something, it has this kind of psychosis, and there's only a small percentage of people who are abnormal. But a larger percentage of people who want to know how to make life happy. So this is what we're going to be talking about in positive psychology. And it's a very exciting field because in less than 10 years, they almost had 300,000 articles written in this. 300,000 studies were conducted in less than 10 years. That's amazing. It's almost as if someone uncorked all these psychologists and went, hey, now you can actually talk about the good stuff. What do you want to study? And it gave us permission to start studying things that actually matter to people. Okay? And not just psychologists. I'm not saying that the other stuff doesn't matter. I'm saying that what we're studying now is broader and affects more people. Okay? So yeah, so we have Martin Seligman, who is one of the granddaddies of this, and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I think that you get to be a positive psychologist if you actually pronounce his name right. So once I can do it right, I get to be one. They're the founding fathers of this. And they decided it's time. It's time to start focusing on the positive. And why did they take a whole journal article? Well, because Martin Seligman was the president of the APA at the time, so he could do what he wanted, pretty much. And that's why he got to do that. But since then, these guys have produced a ton of stuff. Let's look at, where are we? Happiness. Hi. What do we know about happiness? Well, would you be surprised to know that people consider being happy more important than being famous or having money? Would you be surprised? No? Really? A lot of people were surprised with this. It's like you guys are getting the tail end of things. But yeah, it's like wealth, fame, love, and attractiveness aren't as important as being happy. Like twice as much more important to be happy than everything else. Okay? Let's see. When you're grateful, when you start remembering about happy things, you get happier. Now, this might seem kind of stupid. I mean, it might seem kind of like logical. But do you realize we've spent 120 years trying to figure out how to deal with depression? And the most we've come up with is drugs and talk therapy. They do a study, and all of a sudden it's like, you know, as long as you're grateful and you focus on the happy things, guess what? You'll be happier. And you're like, wow, that seems really simple. What, no drugs? You know, and I'm not saying don't take your drugs. Of course, take your drugs, go to your therapist. But practice this. When I was in my first PhD program, and we're going to get into that, because I didn't finish my first PhD program. And I'll explain that too, because I like shit. I had a professor for my normal psych class, and we were talking about depression. And he's like, well, I've been a therapist for, you know, I don't know how many years, and the guy was old. I mean, a lot older, and he was a teeny little guy. And he goes, you know, one of the things I have found over the years that works with my clients who are depressed is tell them, you know, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take your meds, I want you to come to therapy, but in the meantime, in between times, I want you to do the things that non-depressed people do. And of course, you know, we're all sitting there going, taking notes going, what does that mean? What do non-depressed people do? And he goes, well, think about it. What do non-depressed people do? Anybody?
They go out.
Hmm?
They go out.
They go out. And what else do they do?
Smile.
They smile. And you actually tell clients, okay, I want you to go out and I want you to smile for like 5 minutes at people, random people. What else do happy people do? I mean, do non-depressed people do? I'm not even saying happy. Anybody? They're friendly and social. So maybe they'll say to a friend, hey, let's go out. Let's go have dinner. So what happens to these people when they start pretending that they're not depressed? They fake it until they make it. Exactly. And it actually works. So here's this little guy, 20-something years ago. He figured it out. And we never even looked at it because, no, we're too busy going, well, which is better, the medication or the therapy? Because that's what we were really focused on 25 years ago in psychology. Which one is more effective? Is it the therapy that's more effective? Is it the medication? Oh, wait, when we put them together, they're the most effective. That's what we were looking at. Whereas this other guy's saying, hey, just pretend. Be grateful. Remember the happy times. Reminisce with your friends. Reminisce with your family. What do depressed people do?
Think about how bad it is, right?
They dwell on what they don't have, what's happened to them, what they've lost.
I'm more into it.
That doesn't mean anything to them because they're focused on the depression. Subjective well-being. Like I said, very fancy way of saying, are you okay? And it has all these like very you know, cognitions and feelings and all that. And actually, have you seen the commercial where the psychologist is saying, it's like, what would you do if you had all the money in the world? And they have like this like yellow board, I think it's like for saving for your retirement. And then people are like, well, I would be a baker, or I'd be a pilot, and whatever. That guy is actually the daddy, the granddaddy of subjective well-being. And how important it is to create your subjective well-being. And how, like, older people who actually create subjective well-being live longer. We know this now, that people live longer when they have subjective well-being. And now, of course, why are we calling it subjective? His well-being is not my well-being. What makes you happy? What makes you content?
Family.
Family. Okay, so far we're pretty much the same. God, give me someone who doesn't care about their family. No. So, what else? You go out with friends? Sometimes? Don't lie. Come on, you're young.
I like technology.
Okay, technology. Is it exciting to you?
Yeah, it's intriguing because it's growing so fast.
Okay, so that gives you a passion. Okay, that's what makes him happy. Now, for me, reading an article on neuroplasticity makes me happy. Like geeky happy, like, oh my God. I'm like walking around going, you won't believe what I just read. Okay, it's a geek thing, I know. I admit it. Okay, did you know that Latin Americans report higher subjective well-being? More than East Asians. Interesting. Why is that?
Because tequila's a stimulant.
It's a depressant, but close enough.
And it's a stimulant.
It's a stimulant?
Apparently that's the agave, right? We were
The agave? Really?
Yeah.
Because of the sugar?
something.
The sugar in it?
Yeah, it's a new research.
But I'm pretty sure.
Thanks to John.
I think this is like, you know, home research, right? This isn't like real peer-reviewed research.
He said it was going to
self-explanatory.
forever.
Okay. So, why is that? Well, one of the things we found too is that East Asians and Asians in particular don't necessarily value happiness the way we do. I'm not saying that they don't like being happy, but they don't value it the way we do. In some cultures in Asia, when you smile at them, that's considered aggressive. So here you are, you're a positive psychologist. Oh, I want to compare Americans and Asians, and you go over there, you're showing them pictures about smiling people. Does this make you happy? And they're like, no. Why you got to be mad at me? Why you got to get up in my grill? No, they don't like that. Interesting, huh? And as we become more global and we become more, united, these are things we need to know. Because some of you are going to end up working with those kinds of populations. Some of you are going to end up moving back there. So how do you deal with that? You need to learn that. This is one of my favorite dinner studies. They took homeless people in Calcutta, India, California, and Portland. And they tested their subjective well-being. Okay? The homeless people here do not compare at all to the homeless people in India. Homeless people in India do not have shelters, do not have social workers going out there and counting them and bringing them blankets and things like that, the way we do here. Because that's how we deal with that. However, the people in India report higher subjective well-being. Why? In our opinion, we'd be like, my God, all you have is what, one shoe? And you're happy? Why do you have so much subjective well-being? Well, because they actually stay in packs. And they stay like in a community, and they create a community of homeless people. And in that social living, they create their subjective well-being. Fascinating. Does that work here? No, because our homeless people don't do that. Our homeless people tend to be loners. They tend to isolate themselves.
Does that have to do with like the caste system that like we have there?
Who knows? You see, that's a study right there. Why is it that they can do that? Has anybody watched the documentary Happy? Mm-hmm. It's available for free on Amazon. Okay? Watch it.
And Netflix too.
And Netflix too? Okay.
Well,
I know that it's on Amazon. It is fascinating. They go all over the world and look up happy. Okay, and they show one guy in India who basically pulls like a rickshaw for a living. This guy is happier than a pig in slop. And he lives in a little shanty town, has absolutely nothing, but he can't stop smiling. Because for him, he has everything. I find that amazing. Okay, so now we're talking about making meaning. Anybody have a clue what I'm talking about? Yes. It's pretty much there in the words. What does it mean to make meaning, sir?
Yeah.
To make meaning. Isn't that obvious? You know, it's like, I take this to people and they just look at me and they just glaze, psychologists, they just glaze over like, what are you talking about, making meaning? Making meaning. Where you actually set out to create a meaning about something. So like if you look it up in the research, you're going to see that a lot of it is spent on language. And people are like, oh, what does this mean? And what does this mean? And how semantics, how we end up remembering things when we take a word and then we actually pair it with something. For example, if I gave you this really impossible word to remember, but I told you, you know what? Look at this word and I want you to think of what it reminds you of when you were a kid. So you look at the word and, you know, let's say neuroplasticity. I love that word. So you're like, oh, I'm never going to remember this. I don't know what it means, blah, blah, blah. But you just need to remember the word. How are you going to remember the word? What does it remind you of? Neuroplasticity. Just say it in your head. It doesn't have to be the definition. I don't want the definition.
Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo.
Finding Nemo. Okay. From now on, when I think of neuroplasticity, I'm going to think of Finding Nemo. And I'm going to think of Dory. And why was it that she couldn't create a memory? And all of a sudden, neuroplasticity becomes so ingrained in my head because I'm actually pairing it with something meaningful to me. The movie made me cry. All of a sudden it becomes emotional. And when you make things emotional, guess what? You'll remember them forever and ever. That's something I learned when I was an undergraduate. Never forget that one. Okay, so meaningfulness and incentive motivation. My gosh, that's a mouthful. What does that mean? I don't know. We'll see. When we talk about, let's see where I am in this.
Carrot.
Huh? She has a carrot.
She eats healthy.
She's reaching for
Is
it.
that even like a thing anymore? Because like when I was younger, the carrot and the stick. Anything? I don't know. Yes?
No, we've talked about incentives.
Incentives, okay. The carrot and the stick. Well, it comes from this idea that they would make horses move by putting a big stick in front of it with a carrot. So instead of like hitting it, because one of the things that people would do, remember, they would whip the horses, but instead of hitting the horse, and when you're more humane, you put a carrot just outside its reach. Because that's humane, isn't it? It's like, so that you make them walk towards the carrot. So then, I know it's mean, I know it's mean, guys. I know. But what I'm talking about here is that what motivates you? What motivates you? In psychology, 50-something years ago, a guy named Maurer said, do you know what motivates people? Avoiding pain motivates people. I want you to think about, psychology and the history of psychology. There's some dark periods. There's some really, really dark periods. And this is coming from that period. So he's saying that everything that you do, okay, you just moved, didn't it? Everything that you do, everything to make you move, is to avoid pain. So let's think about that. Is Maurer correct? Think about things that you do, that you're motivated to do on a daily basis to avoid pain. Who needs to have a cup of coffee when they get up? Who gets a headache if they don't have a cup of coffee? Okay, so all of a sudden, that's an addiction. All of a sudden, this yummy cup of coffee is no longer a treat. It's a way of avoiding pain. So you're motivated to get up and take a shower and get to Starbucks and get a cup of coffee. Okay? So Maurer, in that sense, was correct. What else do we do? Who brushes their teeth in the morning to avoid having to go to the dentist? Okay? Who takes vitamins so they don't have to go to the doctor? All the things that we do, there's a bunch of things that we do on a daily. Who ends up, okay, who makes phone calls because you don't want to have to deal with them when they get pissed at you? We all do that. You know, we do things to avoid pain. So in one respect, Maurer was right. We do a lot of things to avoid pain. And he comes up with these like elaborate examples of like, think like you're a caveman. What gets you out of your cave in the morning? What makes you move out of the safety of your cave every day? You're hungry. Well, what happens if you get too hungry? You die. So, to avoid death, we go out in search for food, according to Maurer. Okay? So, you go out and you go and search for food. But when you're out there, what happens? A saber-toothed tiger comes out. And then you die anyway. No. And then what do? What becomes more important then? What's the incentive? Preservation. So you're going to run back to your cave. Well, at some point you're going to get so hungry that you don't care about that cat anymore, do you? Because what's more impending? What death is more impending? Your hunger or the kitty cat? Okay. Look at this. This thing is hopping over the. You're like blowing my leads here. Okay. So, pain avoidance and caveman stuff. But does that really make you move? I mean, seriously. After you deal with your bodily fluids and everything else that you need to do in the morning, what really gets you moving? Why do you show up here? Because I make you. You enjoy learning. Why? Why would you enjoy learning? What does that do for you?
Knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. I've seen that commercial too. What else? What else does it do for you? What else does it do for you?
It makes me closer to my degree.
It makes you what?
Closer to my degree.
Makes you closer to your degree. And I've got some of those, and they sit in a box. So, what does that do for me? You know, what else? What does it mean to you?
Well, then I can help people once I get my degree.
Oh, wait a minute. Stop. Hold the phone. So, you're not avoiding homelessness or being destitute for getting an education, right? You actually have a meaning to your education, which is what?
I get to help people.
You get to help people. And that means something to you. And then, if we're like really good psychologists, we'll actually get into why that matters to you. But we're not going to do that today. But someday you're going to want to do that, because then it's going to even make it more meaningful to you. Okay? And I recommend that, as a side note for everybody here who wants to be a therapist, go to therapy. You'll be a better therapist when you do. So Maurer is here saying, okay, everything we do is to avoid pain. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Sarah.
Sarah. Sarah just said, wait, I want to go to school. I want to stay up late at night writing a paper and trying to figure out whether to double space my references or single space my references. And oh my God, I'll just do it both ways. Who did that? That was brilliant, by the way. I'll just do it all three ways. What is she like? Why do you care? What matters? Getting a grade. Why does that mean anything to you? What? Getting an education. Why? Do you see? I mean, it's like, yeah. Because at the end of the day, something means something really important to you. Okay? It's like, how many here, when you were little kids, promised your mom or dad that you were going to be a doctor, a lawyer, astronaut, cowboy, something? We all, at some point in your life, you promised somebody something. Right? And that created meaning to you, because you committed to somebody to do something. Now, granted, as you get older, that might change, but there was something important to that. It wasn't necessarily to be a doctor or whatever, but you committed to something, to being something bigger. And that was something meaningful to you. So when you go home and you show your mom, hey, Mom, I got an A in that class. And she's like, oh, I'm so proud of you. Wow. That means something, right? So it makes you move. Is it making Mommy proud? I don't know. So, I want you to do me a favor. Wait, it didn't move? There, wait. Where's my... There we go. We're going to skip that, and we're going to go this. I want you to do me a favor. If you have a little piece of paper, or in your head, or on your phone, write it down, because I want you to do this. Write down 3 goals. Really quick. This is not going to be a big deal. And be specific. Be specific. What is it going to look like? Okay, one of the things that we do is that we tend to be very unspecific with our goals. It's like, I'd like to be, you know, a therapist. Well, what? I never thought that I was going to be working with sex offenders in a prison, people. I had to be more specific when I wrote things down. Okay? So be specific in what you're saying. I'm not saying that was a bad experience, I'm just saying it was an experience. Who's first? Oops. Not yet. Why is that doing?
Automatic.
I don't know. Just hold it there. Pause. Just write it down.
3 goals.
3 goals.
3 goals in my life?
Yeah.
And be specific.
Be specific.
Yes.
Because if you say things like money, I want to know how much money. If you say things like family, your own family, your family of origin, the family you choose, what are you talking about? And while you're doing that, I also want you to think of this. What's motivating you to get there? What's your incentive to reach that goal? We're ready, apparently. Okay, can you tell me like one of your goals?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Buying your mom a house.
Buying your mom a house. Where?
San Diego.
San Diego. That's a good goal. Why?
Because we've lived with my grandparents my whole life, and I know that she would like a house of her own, so all of my goals kind of lead up to that.
What would it mean to you to do that for her?
Seeing her happy makes me happy, so it's just that personal satisfaction, I guess.
Okay. It's more than personal satisfaction.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot more than that. I mean, if I cry a little bit and I actually put my therapist on, I'll make you cry about this one. So, listen to the goal, okay? Buying her mom a house. Now, what's that going to take? It's going to take a lot, right? Because, you know, houses aren't cheap. They're not giving them away anymore, so you have to be motivated with something more than just making money. Because, I mean, when you ask, like, let's say you ask a teenager. You ask somebody who's like 15, what do you want? And they're like, money, fame, very unspecific. But they have this idea that, you know, money's going to change everything. Well, if that were true, everybody would be a millionaire, right? If money were that important, if money meant that much, everybody would be a millionaire. Everybody would have a mansion, and everybody would have a yacht. But at some point, it doesn't matter to us that much anymore. Why? Meaning. Because it doesn't mean that much to you. Okay? So look at your goals. And start to look at what's the meaning that you've attached to each of these goals. Because I will tell you now, from my experience and from the literature, if you do not have a deep sense of meaning for each of these goals, at some point you're probably going to have to let it go. I know that's sad, huh? Anybody want to... Oh, are you raising your hand or are you just stretching?
Sorry.
No? No, okay, sir.
The meaning of the code.
No, what did you want to say? What did you want to share?
I'm just gonna share.
Go ahead.
I'd like to help create like government or privately funded community health centers in low-income communities.
Why would you want to do that? That sounds like a very thankless job.
Just to create like a space to like allow for more community development, you know, between people in the community.
I get you.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you, though?
It means like just better space, like better communication in communities.
Okay.
Where people like get to know each other. Like, a lot of people don't know their neighbors. It'd be a place where people can get to.
Okay, I totally get what you're saying. What's your name?
Dominic.
Dominic. Dominic. Why is that important to you?
I think the world would be a better place if more people.
So it's important to the world. How about to Dominic? What does it mean to Dominic?
It make me happier to see that sort of thing happening in places around me.
So I want you to think about something. When you hear stories about people who've done these things and created these amazing things, you're always going to hear that backstory. That, you know, I grew up in a neighborhood where nobody knew each other and nobody felt safe and I didn't have any friends. And I don't want kids to grow up like that anymore. All of a sudden, this idea of like the world being happy, it doesn't really matter anymore, really. It means like, oh, that's really big. How about that one kid who doesn't have a friend? All of a sudden, your goal becomes about that kid. And that's the incentive to reach the goal. Okay? When we talk about incentive motivation, we're talking about what's going to get you moving. Is it going to be the world that gets you moving? Have you watched the news? It's kind of depressing out there. It's going to be that kid. This kid. This kid, when he opens up his eyes, he jumps up like he's late for something. This was 7 years ago. He's still doing this. This is my son. I have no idea what goes on in his head. But all I know is that the moment that his little eyes crack open, he's up. And he's excited. Okay? There's something that motivates him to move every morning. And I asked him, what? What's going on? What's in that head? And he's like, I might miss something. And the reason why this is important to me is because he's so mean. That is so mean. Okay? When I wake up, I jump out of bed. I don't know why. I don't want to miss anything. That's meaningful to me. If I miss something, oh my gosh, what if they quiz me? I don't know. Okay? So, Ricky jumps out of bed every day. By the time that we get up, this kid has made, damn it. This kid has made like 3 things with his Legos. He's watched a show. He's made himself breakfast. 7 years old. That's what he does. So, this other researcher named Klinger looked at Maurer's stuff and said, you know, I get your whole, we do things to avoid pain, that we push away from pain. But you know what? Meaningfulness pulls me towards something. I'm no longer avoiding the saber-toothed tiger. I'm being pulled to move somewhere where they don't have them. All of a sudden, very different perspective. You know, are you being pushed away from your grandparents' house, or are you being pulled to a house in San Diego? No, but I want you to look at that. This is rhetorical, you know, mull it over for the next 20 years. Which one's going to make you move faster? Is it the pull or the push? Well, obviously, there's some things that we're going to push away from, like, oh my God, there's a car coming. We're going to run away. But what's going to keep you motivated to create a community center? What's the pull to that? Is it still the idea of like creating a community because you don't want to be lonely? Or is it the idea of changing the world? What's more meaningful to you? So Klinger said, okay, Maurer had a good idea, but let's tweak it up. I think that the pull is more powerful than the push. This is very different from abnormal psych, isn't it?
Yes.
So, okay, now of course he doesn't want to move. It's typical him. Okay, so our incentives mediate our goals. What does that mean? Well, when you get into like really high level statistics, that's going to actually mean something. But for now, if you think about you're standing in point A, your goal is point B, your incentive would be like the car that you drive to point B, right? An incentive, I mean, a goal is an incentive, but incentive's not necessarily your goal. Okay, so for example, if living in San Diego in your own house is your, do you mind if I use your, okay. So, living in San Diego in your own house is your goal. What's the incentive in that? So you start looking at what does that mean outside of just being outside of my grandparents' house. Like, well, you know, I have my own property. That's a big deal. That means like I'm an adult. That's a bigger deal. I've arrived. I've made my mom happy. All of a sudden, all these little teeny things that aren't necessarily your goal, those are all the things that are moving you towards that goal. Seeing your mom happy, that's an incentive. What does it mean to see your mom happy? That's the gas in the car. Because every time you see your mom sad, you're going to be like, oh, well, I'm going to work a little harder to get that house. Any questions so far? Okay. And switched? Okay. Here's the problem that we have, though. Anybody remember this?
Oh, yes.
Yes, Indiana Jones, the not-so-good movie, Temple of Doom, where he goes and he reaches in, says, Kaliman, rips out his heart. That's kind of like us and our goals. Our goals really define who we are. Our goals, you can't separate the two. Klinger says that taking somebody's goal away is kind of like ripping out their heart. And we don't see it that way. We just, you know, we kind of see things like very detached from things. That's point B over there, and someday I will get to that point B, and like I'll come up to you, Dominic, 20 years later and go, what happened to point B? And you're like, oh, yeah, well, I don't know. Stuff happened. But that's how I remember you. I remember you, Dominic, Community Center. So what happened? Who separated you from your goal? How did you get separated from that goal? And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing to do. I have separated from more goals than I care to admit. But that's a big deal, to separate from a goal. And we don't actually acknowledge it in our society when people do that. For example, how many of you have changed majors? How was that for you? Was it hard? Did you have to think about it? Or was it just a simple check a box? Send an email. It's a hard thing to do. When I started school at Loyola, I went in as pre-med. I got into their biology department, and I was there for the orientation, and I went, ugh, I don't like this. I had already done, I mean, I grew up here in the South Bay. I went to Bishop Montgomery High School, and I went to Scrock. And I got my, Mercy Medical Technician certificate, and I got my medical assisting thing, because I was going to be a doctor. Not only was I going to be a doctor, I was going to be an OBGYN. That's what I wanted to do. I really love that stuff. Orientation, I'm sitting there going, I hate this. I hated it. But breaking up from my major was like a breakup. It was a big deal. Because who was I going to be? Who was I if I was no longer going to be Lee the doctor? Okay. When you create your goal and you have your incentives, you are basically creating a relationship. Lee the doctor was my relationship. It meant something to me. I was going to help people. Okay? So when we talk about meaning, we're talking about creating connections. Whether you're connecting neuroplasticity to Nemo, or you're connecting being a counselor and helping people. That's creating a connection, okay? This is all going to make sense in a second, because how do we create meaning? You have to fulfill 4 main needs when you create meaning. You think, gosh, it's so much easier in my head, isn't it? But something that's actually going to motivate you needs to have 4 things. Does it have a special purpose? You're shaking your head, yes. So what's the special purpose of becoming a counselor, therapist, or...
I want to do forensic psychology.
You want to do forensic psychology?
Yeah.
That's cool. That's very cool. Now, working in prisons, that's fun.
Yeah.
So, right. Let me actually get to the page where I'm actually supposed to be here, because I have no idea what I'm supposed to be talking about now. Hold on. When we create meaning, for example, okay, let's say, did you work on your paper this weekend? I don't want to call you out on this, but
Yeah.
did you work on your paper this weekend? Did you miss things because you worked on your paper?
Yes.
Okay. So, why? Yeah. Think about it. You know, I remember being an undergrad. I remember doing all my stuff, getting back home, and actually writing papers until I had to take a shower and go back to school. Yes? Remember? When you could actually do that? Remember? What was the special purpose? It was the goal of doing something. What did that mean to do that? So my special purpose was carrying me through it. Now, I go to school now with adults who are, some younger than me, some older than me, and some people just don't do their work. Because it doesn't mean anything to them now. They haven't created that special purpose. That deeper meaning for it. Okay? So that's number 1. Do you have a special purpose? And here's one of the things that you do. Anybody ever heard of silver lining thinking? What does that mean? Have you ever heard of it? Okay. When you look up at a cloud, okay, do you look at the fact that it's dark and it's going to rain on you? Or do you look at the fact that the sun is peeking through? That's 2 ways of looking at it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, this is a temporary thing. This means more, according to me. There are some people who just focus on this. There's a big difference. Okay? Let's say that you missed a big party this weekend. And your friends were like, oh my God, Sarah, you missed the best party. And you're like, yeah, but if I get an A in this paper, then my teacher's going to really notice me, and then I might get that internship. Silver lining thinking. Yes, for those of you who've studied your psychology and you're at normal psych, it's a little psychotic, it's a little delusional. Sure. We can call it that if we're looking at it that way. Or we can reappraise or reframe it and look at it as positive thinking. Yes, you could say, oh, I wasted my time. She gave me a C. Some people will be like, oh my God, forget it. That's it, I'm done. Cloud. Other people will do the, hey, it's a C. Still passed. Silver lining. Okay? That thinking, silver lining thinking, is going to keep you out of depression. Okay, so, next thing. Your goal has to have value to you. Community center man. What value would you create by creating your community center?
I don't get what you mean though.
If you create your community center, you're saying that more people will communicate with each other. If people communicate with each other, will they get along better? If they get along better, will your neighborhood be safer? Ultimately. Will your country be safer? Ultimately. Value. Get it?
Mhm.
Okay. That's a big deal. That's a whole line of thinking in positive psychology, by the way, value. Things that we never even thought about, things that we, oops. One of the things that, all this meaning making, and how much time do I have?
About 15 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, all this meaning making is based on the work of one guy who started it all. I'm going to pause on him because I want you to read that. Viktor Frankl. When I was in high school, they made us read Man's Search for Meaning because I went to a Catholic high school. Of course, Man's Search for Meaning. I thought it was a religious text because they were assigning it in a religion class. And this is the story of Viktor Frankl being in a concentration camp. Viktor Frankl was interred with his parents, his brother, and his wife of only a few months. And he was a doctor. So he gets there, and instead of, basically putting on the smock and being another prisoner, he decides that he's going to continue being a doctor inside the concentration camp. Because that's who he is. Right? So he starts working with the people who are getting beaten every day. He's getting beaten as well. People who are starving, he's starving as well. But he's working. And what he finds as he's doing all this is that there's only two kinds of people in the concentration camp. Those who are dying and those who are thriving. Not surviving, thriving. What was the difference? Well, he was finding that these people would get beaten, the ones who were thriving. They'd get beaten, they'd come back into the barracks. He's fixing them up, he's like, hey, look, they didn't take out my eye. And he's like, okay, so this works for you, thinking that way. That silver lining thinking. Okay? He's finding that he's surviving. He's watching his parents get killed. His brother gets killed. His wife gets killed. And he's surviving this. People are dying every night of starvation inside the barracks. He's seeing this, and he's not dying, and he's eating as much as those people. What was the difference? He had a special purpose. He was helping people. He created value by helping people. And all of a sudden he was like, okay, what was the difference between my wife and me? We were both newlyweds. We were both excited about life. And what was the difference? He was creating meaning every day. And she couldn't find the meaning anymore. Okay? So here I am thinking, when I was like 16, that this was like some sort of religious text. I didn't realize I was actually reading a psychology book. Because the first half is his talk about his time in the concentration camp, and the second half of the book is all about logotherapy. And logotherapy is all about making meaning. And helping people find a way of making meaning of their life, whatever it is. Because let me tell you, if you could survive a concentration camp and come out, write a book about it, and it wasn't like he wanted to be famous, that wasn't important to him. What was important to him is like, look at what I found. This is like the secret. This is the meaning of life, people. The meaning of life is meaning. No need to look anymore. We found it. Done. So, what else do you need to do to make meaning? Well, think of Viktor Frankl. He's sitting in a concentration camp. Meaning has to create self-efficacy. What is self-efficacy? That's a psychology. That's a psychology term. We actually had to create a term to mean, I can do it. There was no word for that until Albert Bandura actually sat there and said, you know what, let's create a word for this because this is an important thing. If you do not believe you can do it, you can't. How many of you know how to swim? Okay, good chunk of you. How many of you walked up to the water and said, I can swim? And jumped in and swam. Actually, probably all of you did that know how to swim. Because if you think that you can't swim, guess what happens? You drown. Even if you are in 3 feet of water, you can drown in 3 feet of water. You could drown in 2 inches of water. You can. Okay? It's all about self-efficacy and just knowing that you can do it. That's a big deal. How do you create self-efficacy? Dominic, how are you creating self-efficacy to create a community center?
I just know.
You just know it. It's like a done deal. Yeah, we think it's funny, but it's not, really. That is how you do it. There is nothing, it becomes this, the moment that any doubt slips in, you're done. That's it. You can't do it anymore. It's like swimming. It's like some people who could swim really well in a pool, and then you tell them, oh, let's go to the beach. You're like, oh no, I can't swim in an ocean. Why not? Oh, because it's an ocean. Okay? Does your meaning create self-worth? If you are not worthy of getting a house, you will not get a house. Anybody knows, does anybody know what happens to lottery winners within 5 to 10 years of winning a lottery? They're broke. Why? They overspend. Okay, but don't you think they know that when they get their money? They're like, I should get a financial planner. I should have somebody help me with this money. Everybody knows. I mean, this is not a secret that we keep in a cave. Everybody knows all these things. Why do they lose all their money? Because they didn't feel worthy of it. That's a simple thing. People who become famous and poop all over it, end up in prison, doing drugs. What happened? They don't have the self-worth. It changed? Okay. So, one of the things that we think is that self-worth and self-esteem has something to do with like thinking you're all full of yourself. It's not. Being worthy of getting a house and creating a community center is all about how good you feel about yourself. So everything that we're talking about here is not just to get to your goal, but it's actually to get to your goal in a healthy way. And not in this idea that, oh, look, I'm such a badass, look what I did. Because that doesn't matter when you're making meaning. Okay, I gotta switch pages, now I gotta hurry up because I'm running out of time. Okay, so, incentive motivation defined. You know what, I'm just gonna actually, we've already done this one. Here's the thing that happens with goals, okay? Remember I said those people who have changed majors. At some point you need to let go of certain goals because they're not forwarding you. They're not positive for you. Maybe you don't care anymore. It doesn't mean anything to you anymore. Let's say that 5 years from now, your mom buys her own house. She doesn't need you to do that. So what do? You find another goal. But first you got to disconnect from the one you already had. Because that has driven you up until this point. And it's kind of like a breakup, people. We're going to be grieving a loss here. Because this is who you are. The first thing that you need to do to disengage, Klinger said, when we decide, okay, let's say that you decide, okay, I got to change majors, this isn't working, and then there's a part of you that said, no, wait, you've done so much so far. Look how many units you have, so many. You can't do this. What are you going to do? You're going to be like, you're going to be behind a year or a semester or something. So what we do when we start disengaging is that, wait, we're going to go back one. We get invigorated. Our first step to disengaging is getting invigorated. We're like, okay, that's it. I'm going to, when I was doing my first PhD, at the same time my husband and I wanted to have kids, and we couldn't have kids, and we ended up adopting a child, but she had special needs. And here I am in school. And I really want this PhD, but I really want to be a mom. Okay? So I decided, okay, no, I will get invigorated. I will schedule myself. And I will schedule the hell out of myself. So much so that I wasn't even scheduling sleep. I had time for everything except for sleep. Okay? So I worked harder because that was really going to fix everything. I was going to be able to be a mom and get my PhD. Okay? My kid had to go to the doctor 2 or 3 times a week. Her first year. How do you go to school? You're taking a kid to the doctor 2 or 3 times a week. So the second thing you do, according to Klinger, is that you get really primitive on this. And you start like having little mini tantrums. You know, you're like, no, I gotta do this. So you're like forcing yourself to stay up at night to write a paper. Or you're going to your friends like, oh, you gotta help me because I gotta pass this class because I gotta stay in this major. And you start losing a little bit. But this is really normal. We all do this. If you think about like breaking up with someone, I'll spend more time with them. And then when you start getting primitive, you start doing the thing, no, we gotta be together all the time. You get really clingy with each other. Maybe you start fighting a little bit. Okay? And then you just start getting aggressive. Because this is where it starts dawning on you that you're going to have to let something go. And you're starting to get angry. You're not just getting angry at the world, you're getting angry at yourself. This is what it's like to let go of a goal. We might not pay attention. It's like, well, if you're very cognizant of what's going on in your life, you will notice that you do this. Like when you're breaking up with someone, where are the worst fights? Right before you break up. Right? When you let go, even a goal, it makes you sad. And you have to grieve that loss. And the expectation of who you were going to be. And many of us tend to bypass this. Many of us tend to pretend, like, no, I didn't mean it. It's okay, I'm fine. This is a big deal. You create these expectations in your life, in your mind, like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, and I'm going to help people, and all this stuff. And that all goes away. You know, your little white jacket, the stethoscope, poof, gone. And after you start grieving, then you get to recovery. Some people get stuck here and never get out. This is where depression comes from. When you talk to somebody who's depressed, they talk to you about all the things they never got to do, or all the things they never got to. I never made this goal. I never graduated. I never did this. I never did that. Because they're stuck here. And they can't let it go. So what's the best way of getting out of this? It's easy. Create a new goal. Boom. When we lose this, okay. Grieving is one of the things that, I mean, as a therapist, that I realize that most people don't do very well. Okay? And you have to take time to grieve. But now let's look back at your goals. Okay? And actually, since I'm running out of time, I'm going to have to like bypass a lot of the things I want to talk about. But really quick. Sorry, what was your name? Cynthia. Okay, your mom's house. Okay? Does it give you a special purpose? Okay? Does it, what was the second one?
Value. Value?
Value. Is it valuable to you? Yes? You're answering very quickly. Think about it.
I thought about it.
You thought about it. Good. Self-efficacy. Can you do it? Yes? You're not saying yes?
Yes.
You're just shaking your head now. Do you have any doubts?
No, but I know that it's going to take a lot to get there.
Right. Is that scary?
Yes.
Okay. And but you acknowledge that, and that's important. Okay? He's going to do this by itself. So, yeah, I was going to give you one of my goals is actually to move out of the country, but I'm going to focus on Cynthia's instead. So, it has a special purpose. So it has value, you think you can do it, and how do you feel worthy of owning a house?
Yes.
Okay, but notice the difference. I want you to notice. The first two things, you said yes, and I was barely done with my sentence. The last two things, because those are the harder ones to get. Knowing that you can do something, that's based on your self-esteem. That's based on how you see yourself. Self-worth, same thing. Okay? So, note that. And what else? What do I want to say? Okay, so then, now, yeah, I'm going to pass these because we just talked about it. So, back again. Why do some goals work better than others?
Because they're easier to achieve.
You think so? You think getting a house is easy?
No, some goals are easier.
You think so? Okay. So, having a stable relationship is easier than owning a boat? Which one's going to motivate you more though? The boat. Or that?
I'm gonna just.
This one.
Wow.
You know, a lot of people think it's this way. Once again, in the beginning I said, what do you think is more important, money or happiness? And you guys are like, oh, happiness. Yeah, sure. But this is what's going to motivate you more. Because that's going to be more meaningful and more fulfilling. Because your boat could be really cool and very shiny and take you all to lots of fun places, but it's not going to kiss you at night. It's not going to listen to you when you're sad. It's not going to hold you when you're crying. That's more meaningful. I'm not saying don't get a boat. But when you have that, then that makes it easier.
What about dogs?
Dogs? Hey, I got two. I understand. Totally get it. But it's what creates the connection. Remember, meaning is all about connection. So you can be connected to your boat all you want to. Anybody ever own a boat? They're a pain in the butt. It's cleaning. It's constant cleaning. It's taking it to get fixed. But they're fun. I'm not saying that they're fun. Those are my references. Oh, by the way, did you see the presentation? Those were all the references I put in that presentation. There's about 40 of them in there. Okay? Just to give you...
Just saying.
Just saying, just so that you know, when you get to a certain point. Okay, is there any questions? Any questions? We only got like a minute left. Any questions? I'll answer anything. I'm like Reddit. Go ahead. Ask me anything. You want to know what the secret is to finishing your degree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Motivation.
Motivation. Good job. You know what the difference? The secret is? Don't stop. That is the secret. Don't stop. If you stop, you will start creating meaning in other places. When you start creating meaning in other places, you start letting go of meaning in other places too. Okay? Yes.
My question is, when I finish a goal, I still have this uncertainty if I've really accomplished what I shoot for. So yeah, so what happens if you still have this kind of uncertainty?
Okay, he's asking, what about the uncertainty? It's like, this is what, when I asked you to create your goals, I asked you to be very specific. One of the problems we have when we create goals is that we're not specific. Therefore, when you get there, you have no idea that you got there. You understand? So your goal has to be, when you say things like, what do you want to do? Give me one of your goals.
Well, I want to write. Well, I want to be in the film industry, but however, I want to work on. What I really want to do is really want to write. But however, when I write, I gotta make sure not only is it adaptable for film, but if the quality is good.
Are we shaking, or is it just me?
No, this whole thing.
Oh, okay.
is- yeah.
So as I was saying, I want to make stories, or stories for film, or stories for stories.
Okay.
That
You want to be a writer.
exactly with the good quality that pays homages to older nostalgic quality that I admire.
Okay. Your goal is very fuzzy. And that would be my coaching to you in this. In that you want to be a writer. So if you wrote that, you're a writer, right?
Yes.
Does that really define being a writer to you?
Yes, but I want to make sure.
It doesn't. Listen. When you wrote this, you wrote it. So therefore you're a writer, right? What you want to do is you want to write for film. You want to write for film and you want to pay homage to the older people. You want to pay homage, I don't know what kind of writers, I mean, I love things like Billy Wilder and things like that in the film.
Yeah, like that. So,
Okay.
1930s and 40s.
Yes.
CCM stuff.
Excellent. I can totally get you. Like having like quick and fun banter. So then your goal has to be, I'm going to write a script that gets picked up. I'm going to write a script that gets bought by a company. Or does it have to be that they actually have to film it?
Actually, I just want to start as my intention is to go into the film industry to learn how they adapt stories for film,
Okay.
and then write the story, and then later on write a story that can be not only just be adapted for film, but for anything.
Okay.
But how at the same time it can be adaptable 100% for film.
Right.
Yes.
Still, it's fuzzy. So how do you know when you make it? How do you know when you actually spike the ball and I mean, like for example, when you look at Sarah's goal is getting a degree to help people. So once she gets her degree, she's there. For Cynthia, once she has the keys in her hand and she signs the title, she has a house. These are very specific. When you create a goal, you never know when you get there if you have this like very ambiguous, working in the film industry, you could be a page at Warner Brothers and not get paid, and you're working in the film industry.
Actually, I have specific occupations, if not just being a writer. I also want to be an editor, director, and producer.
Okay. And this is probably one of the problems that you have with because you have so many goals. And my coaching to you is always be very specific on what you want. Okay? Thank you, everybody. You've been wonderful. I appreciate it.
Hey, good luck with your papers.
I think I paid for it already.
We'll start reading them tomorrow.
I think we have to get size, don't we?
Is it okay if I
I'm not sure. I don't think it's like that.
I have a question for you.